They said it couldn't be done, that a country like Burkina Faso, locked away from oceans, denied global loans, and often ignored by world headliners, could never build a modern infrastructure system without foreign backing. But Ibrahim Traoré didn't ask for permission. He didn't wait for IMF signatures or EU grants. He simply built. And what he built has left the entire continent in awe. Sleek, digital, and fully automated toll stations are now rising across Burkina Faso's national highways, designed, engineered, and constructed entirely by Burkinabe hands. No Chinese contractors, no French consultants, no UN blue helmets monitoring progress. Just local workers, local machines, and local pride. The new toll system isn't just about collecting fees, it's about collecting respect. Because for decades, Africa's roads have told a painful story, built with foreign loans, patrolled by foreign firms, profits wired overseas while potholes grew at home. But now, with Traoré's new model, that cycle has been shattered. Every toll collected stays inside the country. Every cent is reinvested into the same roads that feed the nation's economy. And the people know it. That's why instead of protesting the fees, many drivers are paying them with pride. "This is ours," said one trucker. "When I tap my card, I'm building my road." That mindset shift is more valuable than any bank loan. Because once a people understand they can fund and manage their own infrastructure, they begin to question everything they were taught about what's possible. Traoré didn't just build booths, he built belief. And he did it under the radar. While the world debated geopolitics, he mobilized local engineers, trained young technicians, and repurposed military logistics to move construction materials across the country. This wasn't a press stunt. There were no foreign flags at the launch, no international ribbon cutting, just the quiet hum of machines and the focused eyes of Burkinabe builders. But make no mistake, this is a revolution. Not loud, not violent, but structural. Because for the first time in modern African history, a country is creating an infrastructure funding model that is 100% internally designed, financed, and maintained. And it works. Traffic flows more efficiently. Maintenance crews respond faster. Corruption is harder, with digital systems replacing cash. And most importantly, the youth see themselves in every gate, every panel, every wire. This is what real sovereignty looks like. Not just flags and anthems, but functioning systems that don't leak value. If this new beginning excites you, comment, "We build our own," and like this video, because what Traoré just launched isn't just a toll system. It's a toll on the old way of thinking. As the first toll stations began operating, people didn't just drive through them. They walked up to touch them, to take photos, to show their children what local minds could achieve without a cent of foreign aid. No imported glass, no foreign barcodes, no UN logos, just clean lines, solar-powered gates, digital displays coded by Burkinabe developers. It wasn't just infrastructure, it was a mirror, reflecting back a version of Burkina Faso that many had forgotten was possible. A version that didn't apologize for its ambition or ask for international validation. One that simply acted confidently and quietly. But this wasn't just a financial operation. It was psychological warfare against the decades of dependency thinking. For too long, Africans were told that modern meant imported. That quality came from elsewhere. That any serious project had to be overseen by someone with an accent and a clipboard. Traoré's toll stations ripped that logic out by the roots. And what bloomed in its place was a new mindset. That national infrastructure isn't something you wait for. It's something you make. People began seeing the roads differently. Not as forgotten trails between cities, but as living arteries that needed care, maintenance, and investment. And they understood that if the roads worked, the nation would move, trade would expand, transport would improve, time would be saved. So when toll collection began, it wasn't met with resistance, it was met with readiness. Because the people knew where the money was going. Every receipt fed back into national infrastructure accounts. Every kilometer improved was tracked on public dashboards. Transparency wasn't a slogan, it was a software function. And that changed the entire conversation around governance. For once, the people weren't told to trust. They were shown why they could. And as confidence grew, so did the scale. New stations opened monthly. Training centers were launched for young technicians to learn repair and coding. Regional governors competed to improve road quality under this system. It became not just a development strategy, but a national sport. Meanwhile, outside observers began to grow uncomfortable. Reports surfaced warning that Burkina Faso's non-traditional approach might challenge regional funding norms. Some development economists criticized the lack of external fiscal oversight, but Traoré didn't respond. He didn't need to. The results spoke louder than any rebuttal. Reduced maintenance costs, shorter delivery times, increased domestic travel, and perhaps most importantly, pride. You could see it in the eyes of workers cleaning the booths, in the kids shadowing technicians, in the elders saying, "I thought I'd never see this." Because it wasn't just the concrete that mattered, it was the context. That this was done without begging, without borrowing, without compromising. It was fully Burkinabe, fully ours. And that sense of ownership changed everything. If this part made you feel that development without debt is not only possible, it's already here, comment "We fund ourselves." Like this video so the world can see how structure replaces silence. As Burkina Faso's toll booths lit up, the ripple effect spread far beyond its borders. In Niger, civil engineers gathered to study the system. In Togo, local radio stations hosted debates titled, "If they can do it, why can't we?" On social media, African youth from Kenya to Cameroon began sharing images of the stations with captions like, "No loans, just logic." It was more than admiration, it was awakening, because the real toll wasn't what drivers paid. It was what the old order began to feel. Pressure. Traoré had triggered a silent storm, one that didn't roar in the streets, but whispered in meeting rooms and policy briefings. The whisper that said, "Africa is no longer waiting." And nothing makes colonial remnants more nervous than African action without oversight. That's why reports began to appear. Quiet, strategic, careful reports warning that Burkina Faso's model could undermine regional financial coordination. The language was diplomatic. The meaning was not. What they feared wasn't failure, it was replication. Because if one nation could design, fund, and operate modern infrastructure without donor supervision, others would try. And if others succeeded, the entire industry of aid as leverage would crumble. That's the real reason the old world watched in silence. Not because they didn't care, but because they didn't control. But while they whispered, Traoré expanded. The project moved to secondary highways, then city ring roads, and finally rural connectors. Toll income began funding small bridge repairs and storm drain projects. It was as if the entire country had discovered its own power source, not electricity, but efficiency, and it lit a fire across society. Universities began offering courses in toll system logistics. Local artists painted murals of toll booths as national pride. One even titled his piece, "The Gate We Built Ourselves." This wasn't just infrastructure, it was imagination finally given structure. And structure is what makes power permanent. Because revolutions may rise with emotion, but they last with systems. And Traoré knew it. That's why he didn't hold parades. He held training sessions. He didn't call for applause. He called for audits. Every part of the project was open for public scrutiny. Budgets published. Contractors named. Performance metrics displayed online. No secrets, no surprises, no scandal. That level of transparency made old models obsolete. It wasn't just that Burkina Faso was building better, it was that they were doing it in daylight. And daylight burns away dependency. Because once the people see that progress doesn't require outside approval, they stop accepting outside limits. They start asking deeper questions. What else can we build? What else can we fund? What else have we been waiting for? If this part lit something inside you, comment, "We build in daylight." Like this video and let others see what happens when a country stops asking and starts acting. Long after the cement had dried and the gates began clicking open with digital precision, something else started to move through the nation. Confidence. The kind that doesn't come from speeches or slogans, but from seeing a country function on its own terms. The toll stations became more than passageways. They became proof. Proof that the people could design, manage, and grow a system without waiting for outsiders to arrive with instructions. That proof changed the way citizens viewed the state, no longer as a distant figure issuing rules, but as a responsive partner producing results. For decades, Africa was trained to associate modernity with foreign branding. If it didn't have a blue UN logo or a European development stamp, it wasn't taken seriously. But now young Burkinabe coders were building custom software for license plate recognition. Women from rural tech hubs were training as booth engineers. Retired mechanics returned to teach maintenance. And through all of it, not one foreign consultant dictated the pace. The people were the planners. The planners were the builders, and the builders were the beneficiaries. That full circle model, where value doesn't leak out but loops back, was more revolutionary than any headline could capture. It wasn't flashy, but it was foundational. And foundations are what the old systems feared. Because you can argue with ideology, but you can't argue with receipts. The receipts showed toll income rising, maintenance response times dropping, customer satisfaction surveys climbing, all measured, managed, and modified by locals. That's what scared the system. Burkina Faso wasn't resisting global models. It was replacing them, quietly, successfully, permanently. Meanwhile, Traoré stayed almost invisible. No flamboyant declarations, no new Africa tour, just steady results. The only time he addressed the nation about the tolls, he said, "Let the roads speak." And they did. Every kilometer maintained was a sentence. Every booth built was a paragraph. Together, they wrote a story of possibility that didn't need translation. And the youth understood that language best. In schools, students began submitting business plans for toll-based logistics startups. In music, rap verses referenced, "Passing through gates we built ourselves." In rural villages, elders quoted numbers, revenues, maintenance schedules, as if they were reciting history. Because they were. History made not by foreign entreaties, but by domestic trust. A trust that grew stronger each time someone passed through a toll station and knew exactly where their money was going. That kind of clarity is rare. That kind of clarity is power. If this part made you see that real sovereignty isn't in speeches, but in systems, comment, "We trust what we see." Like this video and help others understand. The revolution isn't always loud. Sometimes it sounds like progress humming at the gate. While the toll stations work silently, efficiently, and proudly across the highways of Burkina Faso, something much louder was building behind closed doors in distant capitals. Think tanks began releasing memos. Financial institutions whispered about non-compliance risk. Diplomatic cables described the project as a potential ideological export. What they feared wasn't just a toll system, it was a framework, a roadmap that didn't rely on loans, didn't beg for grants, didn't wait for approval, a system that proved what few dared to say out loud. Africa could govern its own growth at its own pace with its own hands. And that realization hit harder than any protest, because protests they could dismiss. But a functioning alternative? That was dangerous, especially one that published all its numbers, one that produced real-time dashboards, one that let citizens verify every franc collected and every meter repaired. That level of public control over public money made foreign-led systems look bloated, outdated, and suspiciously opaque. So the counter-narrative began. Western media articles with titles like, "Is Traoré's toll system too simple to succeed?" or "Experts question Burkina Faso's infrastructure model." Consultants who'd never set foot in West Africa suddenly appeared on TV panels speaking about the limits of internal governance. They weren't reporting, they were responding, trying to contain an idea whose time had clearly come. Meanwhile, Traoré said nothing. He didn't need to, because while the world speculated, his people mobilized. Community cooperatives started organizing repair squads for feeder roads. Regional governments began adapting the toll model to way stations, parking systems, even rural bridge access. The logic spread because it made sense, not because it was promoted, but because it performed. This wasn't ideology. It was infrastructure. And infrastructure doesn't lie. It either works or it doesn't. In Burkina Faso, it worked. And because it worked, it inspired. In Senegal, transport unions asked for the software code. In Ghana, engineers visited on study tours. In Rwanda, officials requested access to Traoré's project manuals. Quietly, respectfully, and without applause, a new model began spreading. One that said, build first, then talk. Show, don't sell. And most importantly, fund yourself. Because once you fund yourself, you free yourself. From deadlines, from conditionalities, from threats wrapped in diplomacy. And the people knew it. You could see it in how they drove. Slower, more careful. Not just because of the tolls, but because they felt invested. When you own the road, you respect the road. And when you respect the road, you respect the nation that paved it. That kind of emotional ownership is unmeasurable by donors, but unforgettable to citizens. If this part shows you that progress without permission is more than theory, it's happening now. Comment, we pave our path. Like this video so others know. Real power doesn't beg, it builds. They couldn't stop the construction. They couldn't discredit the results. So now they tried something older, confusion. International headlines became more frequent, more frantic, more manipulative. Is Traoré isolating Burkina Faso? Could toll funds be misused without IMF monitoring? Experts warn of authoritarian over-centralization. These were not questions. They were weapons, designed not to inform, but to instill doubt. But this time, the people didn't flinch, because this time they had seen what success looked like with their own eyes. And when you've passed through a toll gate that your brother helped weld, when you've driven a road your neighbor repaved, when you've checked government earnings on your phone in real time, no foreign report can shake your clarity. That clarity became the shield. The people didn't respond with anger. They responded with focus. A focus sharpened by years of broken promises, of debt cycles masked as support, of progress postponed in the name of compliance. That past was gone, because Traoré hadn't just launched toll stations. He had launched mental emancipation, the kind where dignity isn't gifted, it's earned. The kind where sovereignty isn't a speech, it's a structure. And that structure was now visible from space. Satellite images showed the spread, new gates under construction, feeder roads being widened, digital kiosks rising even in rural zones. And the West saw it too. Their real fear was never Traoré's system. It was that his people were no longer waiting to be saved. That's why the pushback grew dirtier. Anonymous leaks claimed corruption. Fake reports suggested external financing. Propaganda bots flooded social media, calling the tolls a tax on the poor. But nothing stuck, because truth had already sunk into the soil. The farmers delivering produce on time, the transporters saving hours per trip, the school buses arriving without breakdowns. These were the metrics that mattered. And Traoré knew it. That's why he didn't hold press conferences. He held progress briefings. Short, fact-based, visual. This is what your toll paid for, one said, showing a drone shot of a newly reinforced bridge. No blame, no boasting, just delivery. And that delivery became doctrine. A quiet, disciplined approach that replaced dependency with design. One where citizens became auditors, planners became problem solvers, and roads became rituals of renewal. Because in a nation where even movement was once delayed by bureaucracy, now the motion was unstoppable. If this part opened your eyes to how power fights back when it loses control, comment, clarity is our weapon. Like this video and let others see, Burkina Faso isn't waiting for permission, it's already in motion. By the time the 7th regional toll station was inaugurated, it became clear that Burkina Faso hadn't just built a network, it had lit a fire. From Ghana to Malawi, young Africans began citing the Burkina model in debates, classrooms, and community meetings. The question was no longer, is it possible? It was, who's next? That shift wasn't orchestrated by PR firms or global campaigns. It was driven by results. Measurable, local, undeniable results. School attendance up in remote towns because transport had improved. Agricultural deliveries faster. Travel times between provinces halved. And all of it funded not by loans or aid, but by the very roads being used. The cycle of value had returned home. That feedback loop of creation, usage, reinvestment, it became the gold standard. And because it worked, people wanted in. Universities launched scholarship competitions for students to improve toll algorithms. Local fintech startups created payment integration apps. Rural vocational centers began offering certifications in digital infrastructure management. And in every case, the curriculum wasn't imported. It was inspired. Inspired by the system their country had created, not one it had copied. That intellectual ownership was explosive, because now, for the first time, the people were not just consumers of development, they were designers of it. That scared more than economists. It frightened the entire apparatus built on the idea that African planning must always be externally validated. But Traoré had offered a new reality, one where the people didn't wait for consultants. They became the experts. One where governments didn't beg for capacity, they created it. This new culture of competence spread fast, and it reached places the global order had long ignored. Border towns once abandoned were now maintenance hubs. Desert-side villages became data monitoring centers. Toll income funded small libraries beside stations, where drivers and travelers could rest, learn, and connect. It wasn't just infrastructure, it was ecosystem. And ecosystems grow. The growth didn't just inspire, it unsettled. Regional agencies that once dictated economic terms began to feel the narrative slipping. Because how do you justify a $200 million road loan when a neighbor builds a self-funded system that functions better and costs a fraction? That's why Traoré's silence became his most strategic move. He didn't gloat. He didn't point fingers. He just expanded. He let the roads speak for him. And what they said was louder than any press release. We did this without debt, without delay, without domination. That rhythm began echoing beyond Burkina Faso. Young Pan-Africanists adopted the toll booth as a symbol in their graphics. Protesters in other countries held up signs that read, "Let us toll like Traoré." This wasn't about money, it was about momentum. Momentum built not with megaphones, but with asphalt, with data, with daily discipline. If this part shows you how real systems become real symbols, comment, "We toll for freedom." Like this video and let it reach someone still told that Africa must always import its future. The booths kept ticking, the gates kept rising. But what truly opened was not the roads, it was the mind. Across Burkina Faso, a subtle but unstoppable shift was taking place. A psychological revolution not declared in speeches, but lived in systems. It wasn't about technology, it was about trust. Trust that their money was no longer vanishing into invisible pockets. Trust that their work fueled something real. Trust that when they paid, they built. This wasn't passive hope, it was participatory governance. And participation became culture. You could hear it in the way people spoke. "That's our gate. That wire was installed by my cousin. This road feeds my farm." Ownership became conversational, and conversation led to cohesion. The kind of cohesion the old world never expected to see in nations they once called fractured, because they never understood what unity looks like when it's not forced, it's functional. That functionality bred faith, and faith bred fear for those who profited from confusion. In foreign offices, the anxiety was no longer about toll stations, it was about replication. If Burkina Faso could organize itself without aid, then what about Guinea? What about Benin? What about Chad? What about every nation told that their only option was to outsource growth? That fear sparked a new wave of quiet resistance. Calls for audits, suggestions of sabotage, online disinformation accusing Traoré's government of inflating data. But every lie broke against the wall of reality, a wall built with receipts, road quality reports, customer feedback, and working machines. Truth didn't need defense, it just needed bandwidth. So Traoré expanded access. He ordered public dashboards to be translated into multiple local languages. He pushed for roadside info boards showing what each toll funded. He instructed technicians to host open briefings for communities. And the people responded not with applause, but with action. Local volunteers cleaned toll lanes. Students created art installations inside waiting areas. Retired civil servants offered to train youth in financial auditing. The nation had not just accepted the system, they had adopted it. And once a system is adopted by the people, it can't be stolen. It lives in practice, not paperwork. In behavior, not budgets. And this behavior spread beyond transport. Markets began adopting digital payment methods modeled on the toll software. Schools tested biometric attendance tools based on the same architecture. Clinics experimented with queue systems inspired by highway flow data. What began as a booth became a brain, a national nervous system of structure, coded by locals, scaled by necessity, sustained by pride. If this part makes you see that sovereignty isn't just borders, it's behavior, comment, we structure ourselves. Like this video and show others. When systems serve the people protect the system. In the end, it wasn't the size of the toll booths that shocked the world. It was the silence in which they were built. No fundraising galas, no glossy brochures, no debt negotiations, just work. Relentless, local, disciplined work. And that work became the most dangerous thing of all, an example. Because examples can't be argued with. They stand, they function, they invite duplication. And that's what Traoré had created. Not just a toll system, but a living blueprint of how a nation can fund itself, build itself, and trust itself without waiting for permission. That blueprint now circulates quietly, but powerfully, in WhatsApp groups of municipal planners, in rural mayors' meetings, in African policy panels once dominated by foreign experts. The shift is real, because once people see that sovereignty can be structured, not just shouted, they don't unsee it. They organize, they act, they ask better questions. And when systems align with dignity, the need for slogans disappears. Because truth doesn't always need a voice. Sometimes it just needs a road that works, a toll gate that opens, a system that responds. In Burkina Faso, that truth now moves faster than the traffic it governs. It flows through clean reports, through transparent contracts, through faces of workers who no longer dream of escape, but of expansion. Because when the nation builds itself, it stops running from itself. And when that happens, no blockade, no sanction, no slander can undo the structure. This story began with one toll booth. Now it ends with a continent watching. Watching not with envy, but with urgency. Because now they know what's possible. Not promised, not imported, possible. The difference is everything. Because possibility belongs to those who dare to plan, to build, to manage, to maintain. And Traoré didn't just dare, he delivered. If this story has moved something inside you, comment Africa Funds Africa. Like this video, share it, and subscribe. Because what you just saw is not the end of a project. It's the start of a continent waking up.